Welcome back to Nighttime History. Tonight we are stepping into the quiet workshop of a medieval weaver as the sun sets, and lamplight begins to dance across carefully counted threads. You are joining us in the 14th century, where the gentle rhythm of the loom and the soft whisper of wool through skilled fingers creates a world of focused calm. Thank you for being here with us tonight. Find your most comfortable position, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to drift back through the centuries as we explore the meditative world of medieval textile creation. The wooden shutters creak softly as you close them against the cooling evening air. Outside, the cobblestone streets of your town grow quiet, but inside your workshop, the real work is just beginning. Most people think medieval craftspeople stopped working when the sun went down, but actually, many weavers preferred the gentle hours of twilight and early night for their most delicate work. The lamplight creates fewer harsh shadows than bright daylight, making it easier to see the subtle variations in thread thickness and colour. You light the oil lamp with practiced movements, the small flame casting a warm golden circle across your workbench. The smell of burning oil mingles with the earthy scent of wool and the faint sweetness of the beeswax you use to strengthen your threads. This lamp will be your companion for the next several hours, its steady glow illuminating each careful stitch and helping you count the threads that will become tomorrow's fabric. Your loom stands before you like a patient friend, its wooden frame worn smooth by countless hours of use. The vertical threads, called the warp, stretch taut from top to bottom, creating parallel lines that seem to vibrate slightly in the lamplight. You run your fingers along them, feeling for any loose or broken strands. Each thread must hold the same tension, or the finished cloth will pucker and pull in ways that mark it as the work of a careless weaver. The horizontal shuttle rests in your palm, its pointed ends designed to carry the weft thread back and forth through the warp. This simple tool has remained virtually unchanged for centuries because it works so perfectly. You thread it with wool that has been spun earlier in the day, the fibres twisted just tight enough to hold together but loose enough to felt properly when the cloth is finished. Medieval weavers developed an intricate system of counting that most people today would find impossibly complex. You do not simply weave randomly. Every pattern requires precise mathematical planning. Tonight, you are working on a herringbone design that demands you count groups of 8 threads, then reverse the direction for another 8, creating the distinctive zigzag pattern that gives the weave its name. The counting becomes almost musical in its rhythm. 8 threads over, 8 threads back, lift the heddle. Pass the shuttle. Beat the weft into place with the heavy wooden beater. The repetitive motion settles your mind into a meditative state that modern researchers now recognize as similar to the focused calm achieved through prayer or meditation. Medieval weavers often reported that their best ideas came to them while working at the loom, their hands moving automatically while their minds wandered freely. Tonight, as you count threads in the lamplight, you can feel this same peaceful focus descending over your thoughts. Your wool comes from sheep that graze in fields just outside the town walls, but the techniques you use to prepare it have travelled much farther. The spinning wheel that created these threads was invented in India over 1,000 years ago, slowly making its way west through trade routes that connected your small medieval workshop to distant continents. Each thread in your loom carries within it knowledge that has been passed from weaver to weaver across vast distances and spans of time. The dyes that colour your threads tell their own stories of medieval trade networks. The deep blue comes from woad plants grown in nearby fields, but the brilliant red thread you save for special occasions was dyed with cochineal insects, imported from Spain at tremendous cost. A single pound of red thread might cost as much as a skilled craftsman earns in a month. You measure it out carefully, using it sparingly to create accent lines that will make the finished cloth worthy of a merchant's family or minor nobleman. Contrary to popular belief, medieval textiles were not all rough and colourless. Wealthy families owned clothing and household linens in vibrant blues, greens, reds and yellows. The idea that medieval people lived in a world drained of colour comes mainly from faded museum pieces and Hollywood films. In reality, a successful weaver's workshop would have been alive with rich hues that could rival any modern textile collection. Let us stop here for a moment. If you are enjoying this peaceful journey into medieval craftsmanship, please consider joining our community of nighttime travelers by subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications so you never miss a new historical adventure. A gentle like on this video helps support our work and allows us to continue creating these quiet escapes into the past. We would love to know in the comments where you are settling in to sleep tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, let us return to the gentle rhythm of the medieval loom. As you work, your fingers develop an almost supernatural sensitivity to the texture and weight of each thread. You can tell by touch alone whether a strand has been spun too loosely or if the twist is uneven in a way that will cause problems later. This tactile knowledge takes years to develop and cannot be learned from books or taught through words alone. It passes from master to apprentice through countless hours of shared work, fingers guiding fingers until the knowledge becomes part of muscle memory. The medieval guild system that governs your craft maintains strict standards for thread count, weave tightness, and finishing techniques. Guild inspectors regularly examine finished cloth, looking for flaws that might damage the reputation of weavers in your town. A cloth that passes inspection receives a lead seal that guarantees its quality to buyers. This system creates a level of consistency in medieval textiles that surprises modern historians who often underestimate the sophistication of medieval manufacturing. Tonight, you are working on a commission for the local monastery. The monks need new altar cloths, and they have requested a specific pattern that incorporates subtle religious symbols woven directly into the fabric. These symbols are not immediately obvious to casual observers, but members of the religious community recognize them instantly. A series of small crosses formed by the intersection of warp and weft threads. A vine pattern that represents spiritual growth, geometric shapes that echo the proportions found in church architecture. The mathematics behind these patterns reflects a medieval understanding of sacred geometry that connected earthly crafts with divine principles. Weavers learned to calculate proportions based on what they called divine ratios, numerical relationships believed to reflect the underlying harmony of creation. The width of your cloth relates to its length in the same proportions found in cathedral construction, manuscript illumination, and musical composition. As midnight approaches, you pause to trim your lamp wick and add fresh oil. The flame brightens, casting dancing shadows across the threads that stretch before you. In this quiet hour, with the town asleep around you, the workshop becomes a world unto itself. The steady rhythm of weaving creates its own time, measured not in minutes or hours, but in the accumulation of threads, the gradual emergence of pattern, the slow transformation of individual strands into coherent cloth. The shuttle passes through the shed with a soft whisper, carrying the weft thread from selvage to selvage. You beat it into place with the reed, the wooden slats creating a satisfying thump that resonates through the loom frame. This sound has echoed through weaving workshops for thousands of years, connecting you to an unbroken chain of craftspeople, stretching back to the very beginnings of textile production. Your eyes follow the emerging pattern as it grows beneath your hands, each row adding to the complex geometry of the design. In the lamplight, the threads seem to glow with their own inner warmth, the wool fibres catching and holding the golden illumination in ways that make the entire cloth appear almost alive. Your heddle rods rest at the perfect height, their smooth wooden surfaces polished by generations of weavers' hands. Most people imagine medieval looms as crude wooden frames, but actually, these instruments required the precision of a fine musical instrument. Each heddle rod must be perfectly straight, perfectly smooth, and positioned at exactly the right tension to lift alternate threads cleanly. A difference of even a few millimeters can cause threads to snag or break, ruining hours of careful work. The metal heddles themselves represent some of the finest metalworking of the medieval period. Each tiny loop must be identical in size and shape, with edges smooth enough that delicate silk threads can pass through them thousands of times without fraying. Master metalworkers specialized in creating these essential components, and a set of high-quality heddles could cost more than the loom itself. You treasure yours, cleaning them carefully after each project and storing them wrapped in oiled cloth to prevent rust. Your reed, the comb-like tool that spaces the warp threads and beats the weft into place, contains nearly 200 individual metal strips held precisely parallel in a wooden frame. Medieval craftsmen achieved tolerances in reed construction that rival modern manufacturing standards. Each gap between the metal strips must be exactly the same width, or the finished cloth will have irregular spacing that marks it as inferior work. The reed you use tonight was made by a specialist in Bruges, imported at considerable expense because local craftsmen could not match his precision. Contrary to popular belief, medieval weavers used sophisticated mathematical instruments to plan their work. Your counting board, marked with precise measurements, helps you calculate thread requirements for different fabric weights and patterns. The wooden rulers stacked beside your loom are calibrated to the local standard, but you also own measuring tools marked in the standards of other towns where you might sell your cloth. Medieval trade required this kind of mathematical flexibility, as each region maintained its own system of weights and measures. The threads themselves tell stories of medieval innovation that most people never consider. Your warp threads have been treated with a sizing solution made from flour paste mixed with egg white, creating a protective coating that prevents them from breaking under the constant tension of weaving. This technique, developed by medieval weavers through centuries of experimentation, works so well that modern textile manufacturers still use similar sizing compounds. Your supply of thread represents months of preparation that begins long before you ever approach the loom. The wool was sheared from sheep in early summer, when their fleece contains the perfect balance of oils and strength. It was then sorted fibre by fibre, with the finest strands reserved for the warp threads that must bear the greatest stress. Medieval wool grading used a classification system more detailed than many modern standards, recognizing dozens of different fibre qualities based on length, crimp, colour, and texture. The spinning that created these threads required skills that today are almost entirely lost. Medieval spinners could create thread so fine that a single pound of wool might stretch for over 20 miles when fully spun. They controlled the thickness of their thread by feel alone, maintaining consistency that machines struggle to match. The spindles they used were precision instruments, their weight and balance carefully calculated to produce different thread weights. A spindle for fine silk weighed only a few ounces, while those used for heavy wool threads might weigh nearly a pound. Your bobbin winder, a simple but ingenious device, allows you to transfer thread from the large skeins in which it was purchased onto the smaller bobbins that fit inside your shuttles. The winding must be done at exactly the right tension. Too loose and the thread will tangle and catch. Too tight and the thread will stretch and lose its elasticity, creating weak spots that will break under use. You have developed a rhythm for winding that maintains perfect consistency, your hands moving automatically while your mind focuses on other aspects of your work. The shuttles themselves represent a masterpiece of medieval woodworking. Carved from dense hardwoods like boxwood or holly, they must be perfectly balanced to fly smoothly through the shed without tumbling or catching. The points are shaped and polished to slide effortlessly between threads, while the central cavity is hollowed to exactly the right dimensions to hold a bobbin securely without restricting its rotation. Master shuttle makers guarded their techniques jealously, passing their knowledge only to chosen apprentices who swore oaths of secrecy. Medieval weavers developed different shuttle designs for different types of work. Your collection includes heavy shuttles for coarse wool, light ones for silk, and specialized shuttles with metal tips for working with particularly difficult threads. The shuttle you use tonight has a small lead weight embedded in its tip, giving it the momentum needed to carry heavy woolen thread cleanly through a dense warp. This modification, nearly invisible to casual observers, makes the difference between smooth weaving and constant frustration. Your temple, the adjustable frame that maintains the proper width of your cloth as you weave, demonstrates medieval understanding of tension dynamics that modern engineers respect. The wooden arms expand and contract to accommodate different fabric widths, while small spikes grip the selvage edges just tightly enough to prevent puckering without damaging the threads. Getting this tension exactly right requires years of experience, as too much force will distort the weave, while too little allows the cloth to narrow and become unusable. The beater, the heavy wooden blade you use to compact each row of weft thread, must strike with exactly the right force to create even cloth density. Too gentle, and the finished fabric will be loose and weak. Too forceful, and you risk breaking threads, or creating a fabric so dense it becomes stiff and unwearable. Medieval weavers developed an intuitive understanding of the physics involved, adjusting their beating force based on thread thickness, humidity levels, and the intended use of the finished cloth. Your workspace includes tools most people never associate with medieval weaving. A collection of small knives with razor-sharp blades for cutting broken threads without disturbing neighbouring strands. Needles in dozens of sizes for making repairs and adjustments. A burnishing bone, polished smooth, for pressing down stubborn threads that refuse to lie flat. Each tool has been selected and modified through years of use, creating a personalised kit that fits your hands and working style perfectly. Medieval weavers understood colour theory in ways that put many modern textile workers to shame. Your collection of dyed threads is organised not just by colour, but by the subtle variations in hue that occur when different batches of dye are prepared. You know that blue threads dyed in winter will have a slightly different cast than those dyed in summer, because the woad plants respond differently to seasonal changes in temperature and humidity. This knowledge allows you to plan colour combinations that will remain harmonious even as individual threads age and fade at different rates. The thread you work with tonight includes silk imported from China, wool from England, and linen from Flanders. Medieval weavers had access to materials from across the known world, creating textiles that incorporated the finest fibers available anywhere. Trade networks that most people think of as modern innovations were already well established in the medieval period, bringing exotic materials to even relatively small workshops like yours. Your understanding of thread structure goes far beyond simple thickness measurements. You recognize the tight twist that makes thread strong for warp work, the loose twist that allows threads to fall properly during finishing, and the balance twist that gives fabric the perfect combination of strength and flexibility. Medieval thread classification systems included over 50 different categories based on twist direction, tightness, and fiber preparation methods. The loom oil that keeps your moving parts functioning smoothly is made from a recipe passed down through generations of your family. Sheep fat rendered and mixed with pine resin and a touch of lavender oil for preservation creates a lubricant that protects wood and metal while adding a subtle fragrance to your workspace. This oil must be applied sparingly and in exactly the right places, as too much will attract dust and debris that can damage delicate mechanisms. Your heddle threading hook, a tool so small it could be overlooked entirely, represents hours of careful forging by a specialized toolmaker. The hook must be exactly the right size to pass through heddle eyes without stretching them, sharp enough to catch threads easily, but smooth enough not to damage fine fibers. Medieval toolmakers achieved this precision through techniques that required decades to master, creating implements that could last for generations with proper care. The cloth beam at the front of your loom rotates on bearings made from polished stone, a technology that reduces friction to almost nothing while maintaining perfect alignment. Medieval engineers understood mechanical principles that allowed them to create machines of surprising sophistication. Your loom will continue producing perfect cloth long after wooden bearings would have worn out and caused alignment problems that would ruin your work. Your breathing synchronizes with the rhythm of the shuttle as it passes back and forth through the warp. Medieval weavers discovered that this natural breathing pattern actually improves the quality of their work, providing a steady tempo that prevents the rushed mistakes that come from irregular pacing. Medical scholars of the time noted that experienced weavers lived longer than practitioners of other crafts, attributing this longevity to the meditative breathing patterns their work naturally encouraged. The counting begins again as you start a new section of pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4 threads lifted by the first heddle. 5, 6, 7, 8 as the second heddle raises its complement. Most people think medieval craftspeople worked by instinct alone, but actually, complex weaving patterns required mathematical precision that would challenge modern computer programmers. The pattern you are creating tonight follows a sequence that repeats every 48 rows, with thread color changes occurring at precisely calculated intervals to create the illusion of curves within the geometric constraints of the loom. Your hands move without conscious thought, freed by years of practice to follow patterns more complex than sheet music. The left hand guides the shuttle through the shed, while the right maintains the proper angle, neither too steep nor too shallow, that allows the weft thread to settle into exactly the right position. This coordination develops only after weaving becomes as natural as walking, when muscle memory takes over and allows your conscious mind to focus on the larger rhythms of design and colour. Medieval timekeeping in weaving workshops followed natural cycles that modern people have largely forgotten. You measure your progress not by clock hours, but by the gradual shift of lamplight across your work surface as the wick burns down and the flame changes position. Each inch of completed cloth represents roughly an hour of steady work, but this timing varies with thread thickness, pattern complexity, and your own energy levels throughout the night. The monastery bells that ring the canonical hours provide another layer of temporal structure to your work. Matins at midnight signals the halfway point of your evening weaving session. Lauds at dawn marks the time to begin preparing for the next day's tasks. These religious time markers create a rhythm that extends beyond individual workshops to encompass entire communities of craftspeople, all working within the same sacred schedule. Your feet work the treadles in a dance-like pattern that activates different combinations of heddles. This choreography becomes so ingrained that experienced weavers can work complex patterns while holding conversations or thinking about entirely different subjects. The footwork requires the same kind of coordination that musicians develop when playing instruments that demand independent movement of hands and feet, creating neural pathways that enhance overall manual dexterity. Medieval weavers developed sophisticated systems for tracking their progress through complex patterns without losing their place. Small markers made of coloured thread hang from your heddles, indicating where pattern changes occur. Notches cut into the side of your loom frame mark measurement intervals. A system of knots tied in a reference cord helps you remember where you are in multi-day projects that might stretch over weeks of evening work. The quality of light changes throughout your night session in ways that affect both the physical process of weaving and your perception of colour relationships. The bright golden light of a freshly trimmed lamp reveals colour contrasts differently than the softer, redder glow of a lamp burning low on oil. Experienced weavers learn to adjust their colour choices based on these lighting variations, knowing that threads that appear perfectly matched under lamplight might show subtle differences in daylight. Your posture at the loom follows principles that medieval physicians understood better than many modern ergonomics experts. The bench height positions your arms at the optimal angle for shuttle throwing while keeping your back straight and supported. Your feet rest comfortably on the treadles without stretching or cramping. This careful attention to working position allows weavers to maintain their craft well into old age when other physically demanding occupations become impossible. Medieval counting systems for weaving included numerical patterns that served dual purposes as both practical tools and memory aids. The sequence you chant silently as you work helps maintain consistent timing, while also encoding the mathematical relationships that govern your pattern. These counting songs, passed from master to apprentice, contained centuries of accumulated wisdom about proportion, rhythm, and design, disguised as simple memory devices. The sound of your loom creates its own musical composition as the night progresses. The sharp click of heddles lifting, the whisper of the shuttle passing through threads, the solid thump of the beater compacting each new row. These sounds combine into a rhythm as distinctive as a fingerprint, telling experienced listeners exactly what type of cloth is being produced and at what stage of completion. Your thread tension adjustments throughout the weaving process require constant micro-decisions that demonstrate the sophisticated understanding medieval craftspeople had of material properties. As the cloth beam fills with completed fabric, the geometry of your loom changes slightly, requiring adjustments to maintain consistent thread spacing. Humidity changes affect how threads stretch and contract. Temperature variations alter the properties of your sizing compounds. Master weavers develop an almost supernatural sensitivity to these variables. Medieval workshops organized their weaving schedules around lunar cycles in ways that modern textile workers would find mystifying. Certain types of finishing work were traditionally done during the waxing moon, when medieval theory held that fibers would full more completely. Pattern planning happened during the dark moon, when fewer distractions allowed for deeper concentration. While these beliefs had no scientific basis, the regular scheduling they imposed helped maintain consistent work quality and prevented the rush to decisions that lead to costly mistakes. Your mental calculation of remaining materials happens continuously as you work. Each pass of the shuttle consumes a measurable length of weft thread. The growing cloth on your beam represents a specific amount of warp thread. Medieval weavers developed mathematical skills that allowed them to estimate material requirements with remarkable accuracy, minimizing waste in an economy where every thread had significant value. The meditation-like state that develops during long weaving sessions was recognized by medieval religious authorities as a form of contemplative practice. Monastic rules often specified weaving as appropriate work for hours of silent reflection, as the repetitive motions quieted mental chatter while keeping hands productively occupied. Many religious weavers reported receiving divine inspiration while working at their looms, leading to innovations in both technique and design. Your awareness of thread behavior becomes almost mystical in its precision. You sense when a warp thread is beginning to weaken before any visible signs appear. You feel through the shuttle when weft threads have subtle variations in thickness that will affect the finished cloth. This tactile knowledge, developed over decades of practice, allows master weavers to prevent problems before they occur, rather than simply correcting them after damage is done. Medieval time management in weaving workshops followed principles that modern productivity experts are only now rediscovering. Large projects were broken into smaller, manageable segments that could be completed in a single session. Each evening's work had clearly defined goals that provided a sense of accomplishment while contributing to larger objectives. The psychological satisfaction of visible progress helped maintain motivation through projects that might take months to complete. Your threading decisions as you work involve calculations that consider not just immediate pattern requirements, but also how each choice will affect subsequent rows. Adding an extra thread here might prevent a problem 20 rows later. Adjusting tension now saves time and materials during finishing. Medieval weavers thought in terms of systems and relationships rather than individual actions, developing a holistic understanding of how every decision ripples through the entire production process. The workshop silence around you is filled with subtle sounds that provide constant information about your work quality. Changes in the pitch of heddle clicks indicate tension problems. Variations in shuttle sounds reveal thread irregularities. The rhythm of your beating changes when cloth density reaches optimal levels. Experienced weavers learn to interpret this acoustic feedback automatically, making adjustments based on audio cues alone. Your thread color sequence follows a mathematical progression that creates visual effects impossible to achieve through random selection. Medieval color theory included understanding of how adjacent hues influence perception, how pattern repetition affects visual impact, and how thread placement can create illusions of depth and movement in flat cloth. These principles were encoded in workshop traditions that treated color relationships as seriously as structural engineering. Medieval weavers understood that different times of day and night produce different qualities of concentration and creativity. Evening hours were considered ideal for complex pattern work that required sustained attention. Late-night sessions suited repetitive tasks that allowed the mind to wander freely. Dawn hours were reserved for critical decisions about color changes and pattern transitions when fresh mental energy was most important. Your muscle memory stores not just mechanical movements, but also quality standards that operate below conscious awareness. Your hands automatically adjust shuttle angle when they detect thread irregularities. Your feet modify treadle pressure based on subtle changes in loom resistance. This embodied knowledge represents thousands of hours of practice compressed into intuitive responses that occur faster than conscious thought. The silk thread gliding through your fingers tonight began its journey in mulberry groves thousands of miles away, where silkworms fed on leaves touched by monsoon rains you will never feel. Medieval trade networks were far more sophisticated than most people imagine, creating supply chains that connected your small workshop to craftspeople across 3 continents. The thread you handle so casually represents months of travel through mountain passes, desert crossings, and dangerous sea voyages that claimed the lives of countless merchants and their crews. Your finest silk threads arrived in European ports after following routes that had remained unchanged for over 1,000 years. Contrary to popular belief, the famous Silk Road was not a single path, but a complex network of interconnected trade routes that shifted with political changes, seasonal weather, and the rise and fall of various kingdoms. The silk in your shuttle tonight might have travelled through the markets of Samarkand, the caravanserais of Persia, and the bustling ports of Constantinople before reaching the merchant who sold it to you. The deep crimson thread you save for special accents comes from cochineal insects that live only on specific cactus species in the mountains of Spain. Medieval Europeans had no idea that their most precious red dye came from crushed insects, as Arab and Spanish merchants guarded this secret jealously for centuries. They told elaborate stories about mysterious red berries or exotic plants to hide the true source of their wealth. A single ounce of pure Koch ineal dye could purchase enough grain to feed a family for a month. Your woolen threads tell stories of medieval agricultural innovation that transformed entire landscapes. The sheep that produced this wool were not the wild, coarse-haired animals that roamed ancient hillsides, but carefully bred varieties developed through centuries of selective breeding. Medieval shepherds understood genetics in practical terms long before scientists discovered the theoretical principles, choosing breeding pairs based on fleece quality, disease resistance, and wool production that would maximize the value of their flocks. The linen threads in your collection represent a manufacturing process so complex that it required specialized knowledge passed down through generations of craftspeople. Flax plants must be harvested at exactly the right moment of ripeness, then subjected to a months-long process of retting, breaking, scutching, and heckling that transforms the tough plant fibers into threads fine enough for weaving. Master linen producers could create threads so delicate that finished cloth appeared almost translucent, rivaling silk in its beauty while surpassing it in durability. Medieval dye merchants operated what amounted to the world's first global chemical industry, transporting not just colorants, but also the complex recipes and specialized knowledge needed to use them effectively. The indigo that creates your deep blue threads requires a fermentation process involving precise pH levels, specific bacterial cultures, and chemical reactions that medieval dyers understood through practical experience, even though they lacked scientific explanations for why their methods worked. Your understanding of thread origins extends beyond simple geography to encompass the human stories behind each fibre. The cotton threads in your workshop were picked by hand in fields along the Nile River, where seasonal flooding created the perfect growing conditions. These Egyptian cotton fibres were longer and stronger than cotton grown in other regions, making them particularly valuable for warp threads that must withstand the constant tension of the loom. Medieval quality control in the international textile trade was surprisingly sophisticated, with inspection systems that rival modern standards. Silk merchants use standardized testing methods to evaluate thread strength, examining how much weight a single strand could support before breaking. Wool grades were determined by precise measurements of fibre length and crimp patterns. These quality standards were enforced by guild systems that extended across national boundaries, creating international networks of certified craftspeople. The journey of your materials involved not just physical transportation, but also cultural exchange that transformed textile techniques across continents. The spinning wheel that created your threads was originally invented in India, refined by Islamic craftspeople, and eventually adopted throughout Europe. Each culture that embraced this technology added its own improvements, creating regional variations that reflected local materials and aesthetic preferences. Your collection includes threads dyed with substances that were more valuable than gold in medieval markets. The purple threads reserved for your most prestigious commissions were coloured with dye extracted from murex shells harvested in the Mediterranean. Each shell yielded only a tiny amount of dye, requiring thousands of shells to produce enough colourant for a single garment. This explains why purple became associated with royalty and extreme wealth, as only the most powerful individuals could afford clothing in this colour. Medieval trade routes for textile materials followed patterns that reflected not just geography, but also political alliances, religious affiliations, and seasonal weather patterns. Your silk suppliers might switch between overland caravan routes and sea passages depending on which kingdoms were currently at war, which mountain passes were blocked by snow, or which ports offered the most favourable exchange rates for their goods. The amber-coloured threads in your workshop were dyed using saffron imported from Kashmir, where the delicate flower stigmas were harvested by hand during a brief window each autumn. Medieval saffron cultivation required such specialised knowledge that successful growers guarded their techniques as closely as military secrets. The threads coloured with this precious spice cost more per ounce than many craftspeople earned in an entire year, making them suitable only for the most important religious or ceremonial textiles. Your woolen threads underwent processing techniques that had been refined over millennia, with each step requiring specialised tools and knowledge that varied by region. The wool was first sorted by hand, with experienced workers able to distinguish dozens of different fibre grades by touch alone. It was then washed using urine aged for specific periods, as medieval textile workers discovered that certain chemical properties of aged urine helped remove lanolin and other impurities more effectively than soap. Medieval thread merchants operated sophisticated credit systems that allowed them to finance long-distance trade without carrying vast quantities of precious metals across dangerous territories. Letters of credit written in one city could be honoured in markets thousands of miles away, creating financial networks that enabled the complex transactions necessary for international textile trade. These early banking systems were often more reliable than the political alliances between kingdoms. The cotton threads in your collection represent agricultural innovations that transformed desert regions into productive textile centres. Medieval irrigation systems in Egypt and Syria supported cotton cultivation in areas that would otherwise have been too dry for agriculture. These engineering projects involved complex networks of canals, water wheels, and storage systems that required constant maintenance by communities of specialized workers. Your understanding of thread preparation includes knowledge of chemical processes that medieval craftspeople discovered through experimentation over centuries. The mordants used to fix dyes in your threads were prepared according to recipes that specified not just ingredients, but also precise timing, temperature control, and even astronomical conditions that were believed to affect chemical reactions. While some of these beliefs were superstitious, many medieval textile formulas produce results that modern chemistry can explain and validate. Medieval textile merchants developed standardized packaging methods that protected valuable threads during long journeys, while also serving as quality guarantees. Silk threads were wound on specially marked reels that identified their origin, grade, and processing methods. These reels were then sealed with wax stamps that bore the marks of certified inspectors, creating a chain of authentication that buyers could trust, even when purchasing materials from distant suppliers they had never met. The journey of your materials often involved multiple currency exchanges that reflected the complex economics of medieval international trade. A silk merchant might purchase raw materials using Chinese copper coins, pay transport fees with Islamic silver dirhams, and sell finished goods for European gold florins. Successful textile traders needed to understand fluctuating exchange rates across multiple monetary systems, while also anticipating how political changes might affect the value of different currencies. Your finest threads underwent finishing processes that added value far beyond their raw material costs. Silk threads were often twisted and retwisted multiple times to achieve specific strength characteristics. Woolen threads might be brushed with specialized combs that aligned fibers for optimal weaving properties. These additional processing steps were performed by craftspeople whose skills were so specialized that they rarely worked with more than one type of fiber throughout their entire careers. Medieval documentation of textile trade includes detailed records that reveal the true scale of international commerce in your era. Port records from Venice show that hundreds of tons of silk entered Europe annually, while customs documents from Constantinople list wool imports that supplied textile workshops from the Atlantic to the Black Sea. These quantities represent commercial networks of a scale that many people associate only with modern global trade. The preservation methods used to protect your threads during storage reflect medieval understanding of chemistry and materials, science that was surprisingly sophisticated. Threads were often wrapped in specific types of cloth, treated with substances that repelled insects while preventing moisture damage. Storage containers were lined with materials that maintained stable humidity levels while protecting contents from rodents and other pests that could destroy months of accumulated inventory. Your knowledge of thread origins includes understanding of seasonal variations that affected material quality throughout the year. Silk produced during certain months had different characteristics than silk harvested at other times. Wool from sheep that grazed on particular plants developed unique properties that made it especially suitable for specific types of weaving. This seasonal awareness required textile workers to plan their projects months in advance, coordinating their production schedules with the natural cycles that governed their material supplies. The cloth taking shape on your loom tonight carries within its threads a precise map of medieval social order. Each pattern, each colour choice, each thread count speaks to your position within a community hierarchy as rigid and complex as the weave itself. Your workshop exists not in isolation, but as part of an intricate social fabric where every craftsperson, merchant and noble plays a carefully defined role in the larger tapestry of medieval life. Your guild membership, marked by the bronze badge hanging beside your workbench, represents far more than simple professional association. Medieval guilds functioned as comprehensive social systems that governed everything from apprenticeship terms to widows' benefits, from quality standards to religious observances. Contrary to popular belief, these organizations were not primitive labor unions, but sophisticated institutions that provided healthcare, education, legal representation, and financial support to their members throughout their entire lives. The commission you work on tonight came through channels that reflect the complex web of relationships connecting your workshop to the broader community. The monastery's purchasing agent consulted with guild officers before approaching you directly, following protocols that ensure quality while maintaining the delicate balance of favour and obligation that governs medieval commerce. Your reputation as a skilled weaver opens doors, but your social connections determine which commissions reach your loom. Your apprentice sleeps in the corner of the workshop, exhausted from a day of preparing threads and maintaining equipment. This young person represents not just additional labour, but a complex social contract that binds families across generations. Medieval apprenticeships typically lasted 7 years, during which master craftspeople assumed responsibility not just for technical training, but for moral education, basic literacy, and social development that would determine their apprentices' entire future position in society. The pattern you weave follows designs that are closely guarded secrets of your guild. These patterns serve as a form of intellectual property, protection in an age before copyright laws, marking cloth produced in your town as distinctly different from textiles manufactured elsewhere. Guild members who revealed these secrets to outsiders faced severe penalties, including expulsion from the organisation that provided their entire social and economic identity. Your workshop location within the town reflects medieval urban planning that segregated crafts according to complex rules about noise, fire hazards and social prestige. Weavers typically occupied middle-tier neighbourhoods, above tanners and blacksmiths whose work was considered more polluting, but below goldsmith and silk merchants whose crafts carried higher social status. This physical arrangement reinforced social hierarchies that everyone understood intuitively simply by walking through different districts. Medieval sumptuary laws, enforced with surprising vigour, dictated exactly which social classes could purchase the type of cloth you produce. The herringbone pattern emerging on your loom tonight is legally restricted to households with annual incomes above a certain threshold. These regulations were not merely symbolic, but carried real legal consequences, with fines and even imprisonment for individuals who wore clothing inappropriate to their social station. Your guild's relationship with the church extends far beyond simple religious observance to encompass complex financial and political arrangements that shape your daily work. The Altar Cloth Commission represents not just income, but an opportunity to demonstrate your workshop's capabilities to the religious authorities who influence secular power structures throughout the region. Medieval churches functioned as economic institutions that controlled significant wealth and wielded influence comparable to modern corporations. The journeyman system that governs your craft creates networks of professional relationships that span continents. Skilled weavers travel between workshops, carrying techniques and innovations that spread technological advances across vast distances. Your own training included time spent in workshops in Flanders and Italy, where you learned specialized techniques that now distinguish your work from that of purely local craftspeople. Medieval women participated in textile production in ways that challenge modern assumptions about gender roles in historical societies. Female weavers often specialized in particular techniques or materials, with some achieving master status and operating independent workshops. Widows frequently inherited their husbands' guild memberships and continued operating businesses that employed both male and female workers. The textile industry provided one of the few paths for medieval women to achieve genuine economic independence. Your guild's political influence extends to town governance, where textile workers form voting blocks that can determine municipal policies affecting trade regulations, tax rates, and infrastructure development. Medieval craft guilds wielded political power that modern trade unions might envy, with the ability to shut down entire economic sectors when their interests were threatened. Your vote in guild assemblies carries weight that extends far beyond your individual workshop. The quality standards enforced by guild inspectors reflect sophisticated understanding of materials science and manufacturing processes that rival modern industrial standards. Cloth that fails inspection is not simply rejected, but destroyed publicly in ceremonies that reinforce the guild's commitment to maintaining its reputation. These public destructions serve as warnings to other craftspeople, while also protecting consumers from inferior products that might damage the overall market for guild-produced textiles. Your social responsibilities as a guild member include participation in religious festivals, charitable activities, and community defense that connect your workshop to broader civic duties. Medieval guilds maintained their own altars in local churches, funded hospitals and schools, and provided military service during times of crisis. These obligations create social bonds that extend far beyond professional relationships to encompass entire communities of mutual support and shared responsibility. The marriage negotiations currently underway for your eldest daughter involve considerations that reflect your social position within the textile community. Medieval marriages among craftspeople were economic alliances that combined workshops, client networks, and technical knowledge in ways that strengthened both families' positions within their respective guilds. Marriage contracts specified not just dowries, but also access to trade secrets and professional connections that could determine the success of the next generation. Your workshop's relationship with local merchants operates within carefully regulated systems that prevent any single trader from dominating the market, while ensuring that quality craftspeople maintain steady access to materials and customers. Medieval commercial law included sophisticated provisions for contract enforcement, dispute resolution, and quality guarantees that protected both producers and consumers in ways that modern legal systems continue to emulate. The apprentices who will eventually inherit your techniques represent investments in human capital that medieval communities took seriously. Guild regulations specified not just technical requirements, but also educational standards, that ensured new craftspeople could read contracts, calculate material requirements, and maintain the business records essential for successful workshop operation. Medieval apprenticeships produced remarkably well-educated workers by the standards of their time. Your guild's charitable obligations include maintaining support systems for members who become disabled, widowed, or unable to work due to age or illness. These medieval social safety nets were often more comprehensive than their modern equivalents, providing not just financial assistance but also housing, healthcare, and continued social inclusion for members who could no longer contribute productive labour. The international connections maintained by your guild create opportunities for technological exchange that drive innovation throughout the textile industry. Master weavers regularly travel to other regions to study new techniques, often returning with knowledge that revolutionizes local production methods. These exchanges were facilitated by guild networks that provided letters of introduction, financial support, and guaranteed employment for travelling craftspeople. Medieval taxation systems recognized the economic importance of textile production by creating favourable policies for guild members, while also ensuring that successful workshops contributed their fair share to community resources. Your tax obligations reflect not just your workshop's income, but also your social status within the community hierarchy that determines civic responsibilities and privileges. The ritual aspects of guild membership create social bonds that extend beyond professional relationships to encompass genuine community solidarity. Initiation ceremonies, annual festivals, and religious observances provide regular opportunities for members to reaffirm their commitment to shared values and mutual support. These rituals serve practical functions in maintaining quality standards and professional ethics, while also creating the social cohesion essential for collective action when guild interests are threatened. Your participation in municipal governance through guild representation provides craftspeople with genuine political influence in an age when most people had no voice in government decisions. Medieval towns often allocated political representation based on economic contribution, with textile guilds commanding significant influence due to their importance in local and international trade. Your workshop's success contributes directly to your community's political power within regional and national hierarchies. The education provided through guild systems created remarkably literate and numerate populations among craftspeople who needed these skills for their professional success. Medieval weavers routinely performed mathematical calculations, maintained detailed business records, and conducted correspondence with trading partners across multiple countries. These educational achievements were supported by guild schools that provided instruction far superior to what was available to most agricultural workers. Your guild's legal status provides protections and privileges that reflect medieval recognition of craft expertise as a form of property deserving of special protection. Guild members enjoyed legal immunities, court access, and enforcement mechanisms that protected their economic interests while also ensuring that their expertise remained available to serve community needs. These legal frameworks created incentives for innovation and quality improvement that drove technological advancement throughout medieval society. The pattern emerging beneath your hands follows mathematical principles that medieval scholars believed connected earthly crafts directly to divine creation. Each intersection of warp and weft recreates ratios found in cathedral architecture, manuscript illumination, and the movements of celestial bodies. Your fingers trace these sacred proportions without conscious thought, guided by traditions that encode centuries of spiritual and mathematical wisdom into the simple act of passing thread through thread. The eightfold repetition in your herringbone design reflects medieval understanding of numerical symbolism that extended far beyond mere decoration. 8 represented renewal and resurrection in Christian theology, but medieval mathematicians also recognized it as the first cubic number, embodying perfect three-dimensional harmony. Your pattern creates this sacred number through thread intersections that occur at precisely calculated intervals, transforming abstract spiritual concepts into tangible textile reality. Medieval weavers understood geometric principles that modern mathematicians are only now beginning to appreciate fully. The spirals hidden within your seemingly linear pattern follow mathematical sequences that appear throughout natural forms, from nautilus shells to flower petals to the arrangement of leaves on plant stems. Contrary to popular belief, these were not accidental discoveries, but deliberate applications of mathematical knowledge that medieval scholars had inherited from ancient Greek and Islamic sources. Your loom itself functions as a calculating machine, with each mechanical action performing mathematical operations that would challenge modern computer programs. The lifting of heddles creates geometric transformations that translate two-dimensional patterns into three-dimensional textile structures. Medieval weavers developed this technology without understanding the formal mathematics behind it. Yet their practical knowledge produced results that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of spatial geometry and structural engineering. The golden ratio appears throughout your work in ways so subtle that casual observers never notice its presence. The width of your cloth relates to its intended length according to proportions that medieval architects used in cathedral construction and manuscript illuminators employed in page layouts. This ratio, which medieval scholars called the divine proportion, was believed to reflect the fundamental mathematical structure underlying all creation. Medieval pattern books, jealously guarded by guild masters, contained geometric diagrams that encoded both practical weaving instructions and mystical teachings about the nature of reality. These books were often illuminated with symbols and marginalia that connected textile patterns to astrological configurations, alchemical principles, and theological concepts. Modern historians often overlook these connections, focusing only on the practical aspects while missing the profound spiritual dimensions of medieval craft knowledge. Your understanding of colour geometry extends beyond simple aesthetic choices to encompass mathematical relationships between hues that medieval scholars believed reflected cosmic harmonies. The progression from blue to green to gold in your thread sequence follows ratios that correspond to musical intervals, creating visual harmony that parallels the mathematical principles governing sound. Medieval weavers often worked in partnership with musicians and architects, sharing knowledge about proportional systems that unified all the arts. The tessellations created by your weave structure demonstrate mathematical principles that would not be formally described by European scholars for several more centuries. Your pattern tiles the two-dimensional plane without gaps or overlaps, creating infinite repetitions that could theoretically extend forever in all directions. Medieval Islamic mathematicians had already explored these concepts extensively, and their knowledge reached European workshops through trade contacts and scholarly exchange. Sacred labyrinth patterns appear in your most complex ceremonial textiles, woven according to precise mathematical specifications that ensure each path follows correct proportional relationships. These textile labyrinths served not just decorative purposes but also meditative functions, with viewers able to trace the pathways visually while contemplating spiritual mysteries. The mathematical precision required to create these patterns in textile form exceeded the complexity of many stone labyrinth floors found in cathedral naves. Your workshop calculations involve fractal-like patterns that repeat at different scales throughout your textile designs. The same proportional relationships that govern the overall composition also appear in smaller design elements, creating visual coherence that medieval aesthetic theory called correspondentia. This principle, derived from theological concepts about divine harmony, required weavers to maintain mathematical consistency across all levels of pattern organization. Medieval number symbolism influenced every aspect of your pattern choices in ways that modern secular thinking often fails to recognize. 3 represented divine trinity, 4 symbolized earthly completion, 7 indicated spiritual perfection, and 12 embodied cosmic totality. Your patterns incorporate these symbolic numbers not as superficial decoration, but as structural elements that determine thread counts, color repetitions, and geometric relationships throughout the entire textile. The mathematics of your dyeing process involves chemical ratios that medieval alchemists understood through practical experimentation, long before modern chemistry explained the underlying principles. The proportions of mordants, dyes, and fixing agents follow mathematical sequences that ensure color consistency across large batches of thread. These formulas were often expressed using the same numerical systems employed in musical notation and architectural planning, reflecting medieval belief in universal mathematical principles. Your loom's mechanical geometry translates directly into the mathematical structure of your finished cloth. The angle at which threads intersect determines the textile's drape, strength, and visual properties according to trigonometric principles that medieval engineers understood intuitively. The spacing between warp threads creates mathematical progressions that affect how light reflects from the finished surface, producing visual effects that change depending on viewing angle and illumination. Medieval weavers developed sophisticated understanding of topological principles that allowed them to create 3-dimensional effects within fundamentally 2-dimensional textile structures. Your patterns include optical illusions that make flat cloth appear to have depth and volume, using mathematical relationships between light and dark threads that manipulate viewers' visual perception. These techniques required understanding of geometry and optics that rivaled the knowledge of contemporary scholars. The symmetry groups governing your patterns reflect mathematical concepts that medieval scholars derived from studying crystalline structures, architectural forms, and natural phenomena. Your herringbone design belongs to a specific symmetry classification that determines how it can be rotated, reflected, and translated while maintaining its essential character. Medieval pattern books catalogued hundreds of these symmetry types, creating taxonomies that modern mathematicians recognize as remarkably sophisticated. Your understanding of proportion extends beyond individual patterns to encompass the mathematical relationships between different textile elements within complete garments or household furnishings. Medieval clothing construction followed geometric principles that ensured all components worked together harmoniously, with mathematical ratios governing everything from sleeve width to hem length. These proportional systems created visual unity while also optimizing fabric usage to minimize waste. The algorithmic thinking required for complex weaving patterns anticipated computational concepts that would not be formally developed for centuries. Your work follows step-by-step procedures that could theoretically be programmed into modern computers, with conditional statements, iterative loops, and recursive functions embedded in traditional weaving instructions. Medieval weavers developed this algorithmic approach through practical necessity, creating mental models that paralleled mathematical logic. Sacred calendar cycles influenced your pattern timing in ways that connected textile production to astronomical and religious observances. Certain designs were begun only during specific lunar phases or seasonal transitions, with completion dates calculated to coincide with important feast days or celestial events. These temporal mathematics ensured that finished textiles carried not just visual beauty, but also symbolic connections to the cosmic order that medieval people believed governed all earthly activities. Your guild's pattern traditions preserved mathematical knowledge that might otherwise have been lost during periods of political upheaval or scholarly decline. Textile designs served as repositories for geometric principles, numerical relationships, and proportional systems that survived embedded in practical craft knowledge, even when formal mathematical texts were destroyed or forgotten. Modern historians increasingly recognize medieval textiles as important sources for understanding mathematical knowledge that existed outside academic institutions. The modularity of your patterns reflects mathematical concepts about infinite series and geometric progressions that medieval scholars explored through both theoretical study and practical application. Your designs can be extended indefinitely without losing their essential character, demonstrating understanding of mathematical infinity that challenged medieval theological concepts about the finite nature of creation. These pattern systems provided ways to contemplate infinite concepts through finite textile media. Medieval color mathematics involved understanding of how different hues interact according to geometric principles that governed both optical perception and symbolic meaning. Your color choices follow mathematical progressions that create visual harmony while also encoding theological concepts about spiritual progression and divine illumination. These dual functions required weavers to master both practical color theory and symbolic interpretation of numerical relationships. Your workshop's relationship to sacred architecture extends beyond simple stylistic borrowing to encompass shared mathematical foundations that governed both building design and textile construction. The same geometric principles that determined cathedral proportions also guided your loom setup, thread spacing, and pattern organization. Medieval craftspeople understood their work as participating in the same mathematical harmonies that structured the physical universe according to divine plan. The preservation of pattern knowledge through oral tradition required memory techniques that encoded mathematical relationships in narrative form, making complex geometric concepts easier to remember and transmit across generations. Your training included learning traditional songs and stories that contained precise instructions for creating patterns too complex to describe in simple verbal terms. These memory aids preserved mathematical knowledge that might otherwise have required written notation systems not yet fully developed. The first pale light of dawn begins to filter through the gaps in your wooden shutters, casting new shadows across the cloth that has grown steadily throughout the night. Your lamp flame flickers lower now, the oil nearly spent after hours of faithful service. The herringbone pattern stretches before you, each intersection of thread recording the patient rhythm of your work through the quiet hours when the rest of the world surrendered to sleep. Your fingers trace the finished sections of cloth, feeling the subtle texture that emerges when individual threads unite into something greater than their separate parts. This tactile experience connects you to countless generations of weavers who have felt this same satisfaction, this quiet pride in work well done. The cloth beneath your hands carries within its structure all the elements that have filled your night. The mathematical precision of sacred geometry, the exotic origins of distant materials, the social networks that brought commission and craft together, and the meditative rhythms that transformed solitary work into contemplative practice. The monastery bells ring for lords, their bronze voices calling the religious community to morning prayer. For you, this marks the natural end of your evening's weaving session. Your body knows this rhythm as intimately as your fingers know the feel of different thread weights. The canonical hours that structure monastic life also organize your craft schedule, creating a temporal framework that connects your workshop to the broader spiritual life of the community. As you begin the careful process of securing your work for the day, each small action reflects the accumulated wisdom of centuries of textile tradition. The threads must be positioned to prevent tangling. The tension must be maintained to avoid loosening. The finished cloth must be protected from dust and moisture that could damage hours of careful work. These details, invisible to casual observers, represent the difference between amateur enthusiasm and master craftsmanship. Your apprentice stirs in the corner, awakening naturally as the workshop atmosphere changes from the focused quiet of night work to the preparation rituals of dawn. This young person will soon begin another day of learning not just technical skills, but also the deeper wisdom embedded in guild traditions. The mathematical knowledge, cultural connections, and spiritual insights that have guided your work tonight will gradually become part of their own understanding, passed forward through the ancient chain of master to apprentice transmission. The tools around your workspace rest quietly, each one bearing the patina of constant use and careful maintenance. Your shuttles, heddles, and measuring devices represent centuries of technological refinement, each generation of craftspeople adding small improvements that accumulated into instruments of remarkable sophistication. These tools will outlast you, carrying forward not just their functional capabilities, but also the subtle adaptations that reflect your individual working style and preferences. Outside your workshop, the town begins to stir with the early morning activities that mark the transition from night to day. The bakers light their ovens, sending the first wisps of smoke into the brightening sky. Market vendors begin setting up their stalls, preparing to display goods that include textiles woven in workshops much like yours. The complex economic networks that support your craft extend throughout the community and beyond, connecting your individual labour to vast systems of trade and cultural exchange. Your completed work represents far more than mere cloth production. Each thread intersection embodies decisions about quality, beauty, and social meaning that reflect your position within medieval society's intricate hierarchy. The patterns you choose communicate messages about status, wealth, and cultural affiliation that every member of your community can read and interpret. Your textile creations function as a form of visual language that speaks across barriers of literacy and social class. The spiritual dimensions of your work remain present, even as the practical day begins. The mathematical harmonies embedded in your patterns continue to reflect divine order, regardless of whether anyone consciously recognizes their sacred significance. Medieval cosmology understood all earthly crafts as participating in the same creative principles that govern celestial movements and natural growth. Your weaving becomes a form of prayer through action, a meditation on the fundamental structures underlying reality. As you clean and organize your workspace, preparing it for the next evening's work, you perform rituals that connect you to the cyclical nature of craft production. Medieval time moved in circles rather than straight lines, with seasons, feast days, and liturgical cycles creating repeating patterns that gave meaning and structure to daily life. Your work participates in these larger rhythms, each completed project contributing to ongoing traditions that extend far beyond individual lifespans. The threads waiting in your supply baskets contain the potential for countless future projects, each skein holding within it the stories of distant places, exotic materials, and complex trade relationships. Tonight's work has added one more layer to the accumulated history of textile production that connects your workshop to craftspeople across continents and centuries. The global networks that brought these materials to your loom demonstrate medieval society's remarkable capacity for international cooperation and cultural exchange. Your guild membership badges catch the morning light, reminding you of the social obligations and professional privileges that shape your identity within the medieval community. These organizations provided far more than simple trade protection, creating comprehensive support systems that ensured skilled craftspeople could maintain their expertise while also contributing to broader social stability. The knowledge you preserve and transmit through your work helps maintain the technological and cultural achievements of your civilization. The patterns emerging from your loom will eventually find their way into the broader world, carrying with them all the accumulated wisdom of your craft tradition. Some will serve practical functions in clothing or household furnishings. Others may find their way into religious contexts, where their mathematical harmonies and symbolic meanings enhance spiritual contemplation. All will participate in the visual culture that shapes how medieval people understand beauty, order, and meaning in their daily lives. Your workshop stands as one small but essential element in the vast network of medieval craft production that created some of history's most remarkable artistic and technological achievements. The knowledge systems embedded in textile traditions preserved mathematical, chemical, and engineering principles that might otherwise have been lost during periods of political upheaval or intellectual decline. Craftspeople like you served as guardians of practical wisdom that maintained civilization's technological capabilities across generations. The lamp flame gutters and dies as the last of the oil burns away, leaving your workspace illuminated by the gentle dawn light filtering through the shutters. This transition from artificial to natural illumination marks the completion of another night's work in the endless cycle of medieval craft production. Tomorrow evening, you will light the lamp again and continue the patient work of transforming individual threads into complex textiles that embody centuries of accumulated knowledge and skill. As you secure your work and prepare to rest, the cloth on your loom holds within its structure all the elements that have made this night's work possible: the mathematical principles that govern pattern creation, the international trade networks that supplied exotic materials, the social systems that provided training and support, and the spiritual traditions that connected earthly craft to divine order. In the quiet hours of darkness, working by lamplight with nothing but threads and tools, you have participated in one of humanity's most enduring creative traditions. The herringbone pattern will continue growing over the coming nights, each session adding new rows that build upon tonight's foundation. This gradual accumulation of work reflects the patient approach to creation that characterized medieval craftsmanship, where quality took precedence over speed and individual projects contributed to larger traditions that extended across generations. Your work tonight becomes part of an ongoing conversation between past and future, carrying forward ancient knowledge while creating new possibilities for those who will follow. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey into the medieval weaver's workshop, where the gentle rhythm of threads and the quiet concentration of skilled hands created textiles that embodied the mathematical, spiritual, and social complexities of their age. If you enjoyed our work and are still awake, check out our other content exploring the hidden depths of historical daily life. And if you have fallen asleep, rest well and enjoy the campfire.